The key concept that all your listeners have to know is the word anti-fragile or anti-fragility. It's a word made up by Nassim Taleb, the guy who wrote The Black Swan and other books. And it's the opposite of fragility. A fragile thing, if like I've got a mug here, if you drop it, it breaks. So we don't give mugs or glasses to children. We give them plastic sippy cups. So they drop it, it doesn't break, it's resilient, but it doesn't get better. And so Taleb was looking for the word for systems that get better when you drop them repeatedly. And the classic example is the immune system, which is perfect for our conversation here, because that's the way that inoculations work. The immune system is expecting to be exposed to all kinds of dirt and germs and parasitic worms and spirochetes, all sorts of things. And it learns to adapt, and that's what your immunity is. And so if you keep your kids in a bubble, if you protect them from setbacks, they don't get strong in terms of literally the immune system, but it's the same psychologically. If you protect your kids from frustration, if your kids have never been disappointed, and then they discover everything is canceled for the next 6 months, every birthday party, your summer camp, everything's canceled. If they have not had a lot of adversity before, they're going to find this very, very painful. So we need adversity. We need adversity to make us strong, especially in childhood, especially, I would say, from about maybe age 5 or 6 through early 20s. Those are the periods when you grow the most from adversity.
And that's why you say that it's most beneficial in early 20s and late teens?
Yes, there's all kinds of interesting research on when people benefit from adversity. And I see nothing to make me think that 4-year-old children, even 6-year-old children, benefit from trauma. Like, that's just terrible. There's no, you should protect kids, young kids, from trauma. Now, of course, they need small setbacks. They need frustrations. Even as young as age 2 or 3, they need to experience a lot of frustration. They don't get what they want. And that's you develop patience, you develop persistence, you learn how to deal with failure, you learn to try harder, you learn to try something new. So from age 2 or 3, at least, we need failure and we need setbacks, but not trauma. And there was an interesting study, pardon me. It's just
no worries.
It's just water. It's not coronavirus. There was an interesting study by Glenn Elder, a sociologist, who looked at how it was a big longitudinal study that either he did or he had access to. He looked at how people were affected by the Great Depression. And so the years 1929 to 1932, it looked like the world was ending, mass unemployment, much worse than we're experiencing in 2020. And what Elder found is that people who were in their teens or 20s tended to grow from it later, whereas people who were hit in their 30s or 40s or later were more likely to break or more likely to be scarred by it. And I think it was he who interpreted it that part of what's going on is that we're most learning when we're young, but part of what we're doing is we're developing a narrative about ourselves. And so if trauma happens to you when you're 4 or 5, you're not developing a narrative about yourself. It damages your attachment. It makes you afraid. There's no good that comes from that. But if let's say you get cancer when you're 18 years old, and you're terrified and you think you're going to die, but it turns out all these people rally to you, and everybody in your school is, creating things for you, and you go through chemotherapy and it's horrible, but you come out the other end. Well, now your story about yourself is that you're a survivor, that you are strong, that you can take anything. If something small happens to you now, it's like, look, I just beat cancer. This is not a big deal to me. So it's especially in your teens and early 20s, which I think is your focal audience here for these talks, that you most will benefit from bad things happening.
And are you going to benefit always, or do you have to do it in a specific way?
Well, no, you're definitely not going to benefit always. People who are prone to optimism and happiness, turns out they're actually better at finding silver linings. They're better at coming up with a new story. So people who tend to be more anxious and negative and depressed, they may interpret this more as life is terrible, you can't count on anybody. So I would never say that everyone benefits. They don't.
Hmm.
Sometimes people can turn bitter. Sometimes people can tell themselves a story of decline. Um, Dan McAdams, a personality psychologist at Northwestern University, talks about what are the basic narrative patterns are this: things were okay, and then they got bad, but then they got better. That's most stories. But some people have a decline narrative where things were things were okay, and then everything was ruined,
Hmm.
and that's the end of the story. And I think he calls it a spoiling narrative, like things were good, and then like you ruined them, or they ruined it, or some. So some people will have their story shredded. It's not, well, I shouldn't say that. It's not that the story was shredded, it's that they shred the story.
Okay.
So it's important to do sense making, to do it in a positive way. So what I would say to your listeners is, especially those of you who are, if you know that you're prone to anxiety, you're more anxious than average, or you're prone to catastrophizing or telling negative stories, you are less likely to benefit from adversity unless you do something about it, unless you actively try to make sense about it. So there's a book. I recommend in The Happiness Hypothesis. It's by Jamie Pennebaker, Pennebaker, called Opening Up. And Pennebaker did all this really interesting research on how if people write about traumas, if they write about terrible things that happen to them, they make sense of it. They come up with a richer story about it. They process it, then they're better able to put it away. And they show more signs of growth afterwards. So yeah, that would be my advice.